But first up, a man who is well on his way to training 1,500 winners in almost no time. I said at the top of the show, he's within tantalising, touching distance of a first Trainers' Championship. Dan Skelton, I'm not sure how that makes you feel.
It's nice to hear that you think it's tantalisingly close, Nick, but I can tell you it doesn't feel like it.
Does it not?
No, you get a bit of imposter syndrome when you're surrounded by Nichols, Henderson, et al. And you know, I suppose you quietly, slowly grow out of that. I suppose less now than I did a few years ago, but you don't. It's one of those things that you don't want to quite believe is true, just in case it's all a dream.
People would find it hard to believe that you had imposter syndrome, but I suppose that's what imposter syndrome is all about. When you know you're seen at the races and you have a kind of quite a strong physical presence, you know, you're there, chest out, chin out, the old tits and teeth, putting a big face on all the time. What's going on underneath?
I wouldn't say there's busy feet under the water, but you know, when you run in a big team, you know, you're always thinking ahead, you're always planning, you're always need to talk to that owner, make sure that happens, assistants, you know, do this, do that, make sure that's happening. You know, you're a constant buzz. It's only when you sort of get home and like can reflect on a day like yesterday, you watch it all again and you pick out the good and the not so good, and it all perhaps becomes a little clearer. But it's really, really hard to stay in the moment when you're running a big team, because there's the next one and the next one. Like yesterday, all I really wanted to do was spend as much time as I could with Lisa and Pat Hales after obviously the passing of John last week, and sort of be around them. And I look back on the day and thought I wasn't with them as much as I wanted to be, but that's because I've got other owners there as well and other things to take care of. So I suppose being a trainer of a bigger number of horses has, I wouldn't say they're not drawbacks, of course they're not drawbacks, but they have different pressures to, say, you sometimes talk to the smaller trainers who say they have their type of pressure and their concentrated sort of areas to make sure they're on top of. But I think it's different for a large number trainer.
Yeah, you mentioned the numbers. When you started training, did you think, well, I simply have to be as big as I possibly can?
No, I wouldn't say so, but it was always in my mind that I was never afraid to let it get as big as it could get, as long as it was manageable. You know, Ruby always instilled in me that, you know, not necessarily bigger is better, but with bigger comes more opportunities. Paul always had a massive number, but I remember Ruby saying to me once, if they want to come, let them come.
And so you're comfortable and happy with the amount of horses that are coming past you on a gallop every morning?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I love it.
Which is how many, roughly?
I suppose there's sort of 160, 170.
And that's in active training?
Yeah, and I suppose there's always about, I always say there's about 130, 140 to run during the winter season, which is, you know, a big number. It's the biggest number in the UK. I'm proud of that. Whether I should be or shouldn't, I don't know, but I am proud of that. I'm proud of the team that make it happen. And, you know, when you get to the size that we have, I am a trainer, of course I'm a trainer. I'm deciding what they do, where they go and everything else, but you're actually more of a director. You know, the people that are actually carrying out for you, the actors and the riders, and they're carrying it out for you, and you're setting the tone, you're setting the scene, and you're making sure and empowering those people to carry out the things that you know that they're capable of carrying out to a very, very high level. And I know people always talk about how important the team is, but I find that when you're as big as we are, like the team is just, I can't muck out that many horses, ride that many horses at all. You've really got to empower your people. And I think that's one of our biggest assets is, and probably where I've changed the most, is that I've actually been able to step back and go, okay, you asked for that power, if you like, or you asked for that responsibility, there it is, go and do it.
Do you feel that you've applied modern principles to man management? Is there a more corporate structure within your stable than you would have seen at other stables?
Oh, 100%, yeah.
Like give me an example of that.
Well, when I moved from Paul's a very sort of dominating presence when he trains. He's very hands-on. And that was the way I did things, and that was the way I started doing things. And then once I got bigger, I realised that I wasn't able to do that to the same level that Paul could do. I think Paul's very, very good at that, and I don't think I'm quite as good at as micromanaging as Paul is. And so then I've empowered people. Most recently, the person I've empowered the most is Harry. He's taken a bigger role in the training and the day-to-day running of it than I ever perhaps thought he would, But I mean, he's loving it. We never really clash, and if we do clash, I say, well, I'm the trainer, and that's what we're doing anyway. But I suppose when you say, give me an example, the board now, who rides what? All Harry and Tom Messenger and Amber, who runs our second yard. Like, I might say we need to make sure that's out first lot or that's out second lot because owners are coming or I want to jump that or whatever. But that's over to them. You know, the business side of it, I'm not in control of that. That's Gracie and the office staff. They do that. You know, and I can get on with doing what I do. And if you ask me what I love most, I love placing them. I spend hours and hours and hours on that BHA site picking races for horses.
Funny that it's become quite evident over the last few seasons that getting horses in the right category, getting them on the right mark for the big days is what you're getting the biggest kick out of.
I do enjoy that. I do enjoy that. You know, I think Tom Siegel once said we had an unbelievable record in 2-mile hurdles, and I'd like to try and take that outside of just 2-mile hurdles. But when I first started, those were the horses that I had, and I made sure we tried to hit the mark as much as we could with them. And sort of as your scope, the scope of your horses expands and the numbers expand, you can take in other categories. But I always thought those 2-mile handicap hurdles when I started, they were the most valuable races and the one we were most likely to win. So we did target them. I
mean, let's cut to the chase. How do you tread that fine line between gaming the handicap system and not cheating effectively? Cheating's against the rules, so you don't cheat. So you never go over the line. And you state that, you say where's the line? Well, the line is a million miles from where we are because you wouldn't go near it. We're a massive team. We've got way too much to lose by trying to pull stunts, if you like, for want of a better description. But I always... You see where I'm getting at? Because this is like, it's racing's internal conversation the whole time, isn't it? Right? 3 runs for a mark, or how many runs do you need to get handicapped, or which category are you going to get this horse in? And it permeates every grade, and it's the way that almost everybody is encouraged to target races, if you see what I mean.
So some horses aren't blessed with the most ability. So you assume before sometimes you get out onto a novice hurdle with them that they're going to be a horse for a handicap down the road. The horse might be big and backward, and you think, well, it's not going to know enough to win a novice hurdle. And don't forget, especially in the UK, novice hurdles, especially the 2-mile novice hurdles, you've got horses that run in bumpers, ex-flat horses, jump out, gone. And you've got an inexperienced green horse going, what is going on here? For the first 3 or 4 hurdles, your jockey's literally trying to get it over them. And then they build, then they get some more experience. And you'll often find that the horses at the start of the year that win on their debuts in maidens, they get a penalty. The horses that are like 20 lengths behind them those days, not just mine, but everybody's, by the spring, they're 20 lengths in front of them. And everybody trains them, I think nowadays, everybody trains them for longevity because it's getting harder and harder to find a good horse. It's getting harder and harder to keep those horses sound. So I think when you get them, we're all perhaps a little more respectful of the fact that we need them to last more. So I think you're finding that actually, because that's becoming more and more, I feel, for me, becoming more and more of my thought process, you're actually allowing them to mature much later. And with that, comes the positives that, they're going to get better as they run more. And also with this intense focus now on the spring festivals, part of it presumably is having the patience to lay off and not run for quite a long time when there are pots in front of you that you could easily run in. Yeah, and I think when you get to those spring festivals, you talk about the handicap system. Of course, the handicap system is vitally important, but a lot of those horses that win in the spring are hitting good ground for the first time in God knows how long. They've been getting beaten in bad ground, and that's what a lot of people don't see. I mean, there's loads of examples of horses winning in the spring when they can't win in the winter, and people presume that, oh well, they were looking after his handicap mark. That's often not the case. The case is that actually they hit good ground, or they get some sun on their back and they feel different and off they go. I mean, I don't want to turn this into a conversation about Langer Dan, but I mean, he was the obvious example, I guess, of that. But Langer Dan, he is the obvious example, but he's the worst example because he is untrainable in the autumn and the winter, and I have no idea why. When you say untrainable, you mean untrainable at home? Well, he just won't play. He just will, not that he won't go on the gallops. He's quite happy to go on the gallops. He's fresh and excitable on the way to the gallops. You get him to the gallops, he's like, hey, let's go. You get him in the gallop, he's like, yeah, I'm all right. People will think, oh, here's Skelton going on again, defending Langadan's situation. But I promise you, and I think this year people have actually seen, hang on, he might be right about that, because we were rated 160, and we're trying to win conditions races. I'm going for a trainers' championship. It'd be handy to win every pound he can in these races, and he just can't. And I stick by everything I've said about the horse. He's so hard, and I'm actually taking it on trust that he turns up this spring.
And what's he going to run in?
I think you have to run in the stayers, because carrying a big weight in the Coral Cup is not a realistic proposition.
Okay, well that's Langadan. We'll park him for a few moments. Is the public Dan Skelton very different from the private Dan Skelton or not?
I don't think so, and I try to be truer and truer to myself, and sometimes my words get me in trouble, but I stand up for what I think, and I'm sometimes conflicted. And just before I came on here, my wife Gracie texted me and said, see if you can sit on the fence a little today. And I find myself conflicted by wondering, is the fence the best place? Because I want to be true to myself, and I think the industry is at a crossroads, and sometimes someone's got to say something that might not be all that palatable, or I only speak how I feel, and if I get shot down for it, I get shot down for it. But I'm entitled to my opinion. Sometimes people might think it's an arrogant one or whatever, but we're all entitled to our opinions. All I can say is I come on, front up, say my name. I'm not on social media behind a keyboard name and being faceless about it. I'll stand up and support what I think is right, and hopefully more often than not I am right, but I've got to accept that I will often be wrong.
With the situation that unfolded a couple of weeks ago about trainers asking for money for interviews, or at least that's the way it was portrayed. I mean, the nuances of that are much more complicated, but you were at the forefront of the trainers branch, if you like, of the Professional Racing Association, and you went out there and said, this is what I believe in and this is why it should happen. Did you start to feel somewhat isolated insofar as you weren't getting a right lot of support from people around you, your peers, given that they were also members of the PRA, but they weren't saying a whole lot?
You say somewhat. I was just left out there, and I can understand why people left me out there. It wasn't a very well managed message, I think, from the PRA. And I think that's where the problem started. The PRA's intentions are very, very good, and they've got an awful lot of data and information that I think will be enlightening to a lot of people in the industry. And I don't think it should be. I don't think it should just be considered a bit of a lunatic fringe group. I think it's got a lot of good things to say, and I thought as well the sort of this whole Savilness of the situation. So Peter, by his own admission, can rub people up the wrong way, and I think this whole thing that it's one of Peter Savile's idea, that means that we've got to sort of be robust against it. It was a little bit short-sighted, but yeah, I was probably the first one that was asked, "Are you supporting this boycott?" And I said yeah, because everyone had said yeah, and from the PRA perspective, they saw a situation whereby the trainers jockeys were getting paid, the trainers weren't. And for want of a better description, it looked like not an easy victory, but it looked like something that was there to be pointed out that was something that was probably not equal. And it felt like it was a starting point for the PRA to point something out. Of course, it then got construed as greed. And then the other trainers have obviously sort of felt that the portrayal of it as greed, and have gone, whoa, I don't want to, that's not, this is, it was just a badly portrayed message, I think.
When you were driving home from Cheltenham, wasn't it, that night when you were asked about it, I was away at the time, were you thinking, well, hang on a minute, I've stood up there and done my bit, and everyone else has scarpered when they've been asked for an interview? Yeah,
absolutely, I thought that. And if that's the way that they felt, and that's what they had to do for their best interests. And of course, there's owners come into this as well. And that's why I say it was just disappointing the way it was portrayed. And that wasn't the PRA's intention. It wasn't Peter's intention. It came across wrong. And I think if it had come across better, or it wasn't allowed to be portrayed as greed, then I think a lot of other trainers would have supported it, because at the end of the day, it was discussed and they were going to support it.
But even you must have realised that £500,000 or whatever it was, split 160 ways, certainly wasn't going to make anybody rich. But the impetus, what was the impetus behind it? It was
never a financial gain. The money was to stay within the good of the industry. It wasn't about a trainer getting paid, right, that's £40 for that interview, that's £50 for that. It was never about individual payment to trainers. Trainers individually weren't going to see a pound. It was all about the benefit of the sport and what that money could go towards.
So did you see it as kind of low-hanging fruit on the big tree that is moving money from the racecourses to the participants?
Yes. That's what it was seen as. I wouldn't say that this was my drive. I wasn't the driver of this, but it was certainly looked at that way. Like I say, the portrayal of it was very, very different. But the PRA set out, the PRA's first and primary and probably only intention is to get more money into prize money, which benefits the owners, which I really wanted to say at the time, guys, I want this for the owners. I believe the owners are the most important part of racing. You know, there's all this infighting over who's got the keys and who's the most important. I think it's a very, very easy conclusion. The owners are the most important. They put up the money to buy the horses, to send the horses to the racecourses, for the trainers to train, for the jockeys to ride, and for the staff to lead up. It's very, very simple. Those are the most important people, and I think we've got to do much more to look after them across the whole industry.
Can we talk a little about the back of the season? Because it's clearly going to be very important to you. But I read an article, an interview that Mark Boylan conducted with you in the Irish Field a few weeks ago, which has not really been picked up at all, where you said to Mark that you felt that Aintree, the festival, should be moved right to the end of April. It should be the season finale, and you'd have then this big gap, sort of 6-week gap, 5-week gap between Cheltenham and Aintree. What was your rationale behind that, and how do you think that would change the sport?
Well, here I am getting off the fence again, Nick.
Well, the thing is, Dan, you got off the fence in the Irish Field, and no one spotted it.
I actually am happy to get off the fence again here, and if I face a bit of backlash for it, whatever.
Grace, I wouldn't ask him as the first guest of the season if I thought that he was going to sit on the fence for half an hour.
So, firstly, what I must say is, I did say that in the Irish Field, and I strongly believe it. Off the back of that, I went and asked a lot of participants in the sport. I asked the jockeys, that was unanimous. I think the top 10, 12 in the weighing room all thought it was a good idea. I asked the vast majority of trainers. You can imagine who I've asked. I actually also asked 2 Irish trainers, big trainers. I will say I haven't asked Willie.
Okay.
And I've asked a lot of owners.
Gas Gordon?
I can't. I'm not going to. I'm not going to say
Henry?
who I've asked.
Okay.
I'm not going to say who I've asked, but I've asked people who would turn up at Cheltenham and Aintree regularly. Okay. Both sides of the Irish Sea. I haven't asked Willie, like I say. I've asked a lot of owners. I haven't asked all the owners, and I was amazed at the response that there was. My feeling comes from a point of view of an owner, because the owners put up they put up a lot of money to buy these horses, and they want to enjoy the big days. Now, our biggest 2 days in the jump sports are Cheltenham and Aintree. That's a given. We're at the point, this year there's only 19 days between the two, and that's what this stemmed from, was the fact that there is only 19 days. You've always got to decide which one you're going to go to, because realistically, running your best horses 19 days later isn't really right. It's not the best for them.
Why? Let me ask you, this is an interesting point. Why has it been historically absolutely fine to run horses 19 days apart, even at that level, but not so much now?
Because the competition's so high. The speed they jump off in the races, they go from the get-go. The horses are having harder races than they've ever had. I genuinely believe that, and I don't know if there's data to prove that, but I've seen a difference. And when I first started with Paul...
Therefore, as a horseman and someone who's been around horses since you were out of the womb, are we stretching the elastic too hard, do you think?
On the whole herd?
Yeah.
Yes and no. I think our biggest problem's to come. Because if you say, we're stretching it too hard, we're definitely stretching it too hard if we're getting less and less horses into the system, and thus less and less horses at the top level. So, of course, we're only going to stretch it more in the future if you think about it, because there is a supply issue of horses.
I suppose I'm saying, are we pushing too close to the edge with our training methods, and therefore you're not able to run a good horse, a Grade 1 horse, 19 days after you ran him or her last time, because you've got it to such a peak, you've got it to the very edge of where you're capable of getting it to, that it naturally then recoils from that, and you hardly got much horse left for 18 days' time. I don't know the answer to the question. I'm not trying to lead the witness.
I think in the grand scheme of what you're saying, you're right. But rest assured, it's not a welfare issue, because trainers will make the right call.
I'm not suggesting it
But
is.
the fact that it's there to tempt you is the wrong thing. And what's more is it's for the owner's benefit. The owners can't expect their best horses to run their best 19 days later. To compete for the most prize money and with the best horses only 19 days later isn't acceptable to the owners. They've got to decide which one they're going for. They should be getting the benefit of being able to go to the great day at Cheltenham and then the great day at Aintree, taking their friends, enjoying this sport for the best it can offer. We're making them basically decide. And it's not even them that's deciding. It's then put on us as the trainers to decide whether they're going to go or not. And we're almost responsible for the disappointment of not doing the 2 festivals in the spring, which isn't helping us. And I think that's why there are so many trainers who liked this when I spoke to them about it. I think it's something that the Jockey Club and the BHA are really going to have to think about, because I'm going to speak to them and I'm going to say how many people and who those people were that supported it. Like I say, I don't want to put any names out there because it's not fair on them to get asked.
But you're actually putting a proper presentation together, which you will then present to the relevant authorities.
Oh, well, I think Gracie will be busy helping me do that, but we're in it together. I don't know what it looks like in workings, but I know that the first not argument, but the first thing that's going to come back is, well, hang on, Aintree 2 weeks later, you're going to have a problem with watering. I can't have that.
Well, you can keep watering.
Well, yeah, and there's enough water around to have what was 2 meetings later. OK, they were on quicker ground, but O'Toy and Punchestown show us that it's very easy to get the ground that you want at the end of April, early May and beyond. So I think with modern methods, and this isn't something that even if it is implemented, could be implemented next year. It'd be like the years after.
So
and if that meant
poor old Sandown's finale gets junked.
Yeah, but I love Sandown. This isn't an anti-Sandown thing. This is, in our industry, there aren't enough omelettes made because no one's cracking eggs. And if this is for the good of the sport, the good of the owners, for the good of the horses, I think it should be done. And I think if it means that, unfortunately, Sandown has to lose out, well, that's regrettable. But there was a time when Stratford was the last day of the season, and now it's not Stratford's time, so Stratford lost out then. And things evolve, and I think you have to be bold, you have to be brave. Like I say, I'm quite happy to come on here, hang my chin out and say, someone take a swipe at it. But I genuinely believe that that's what, that could be a really big and positive move for our industry, especially in the UK. And like I said, I asked some Irish trainers because I thought I better just make sure I'm not being one-sided here, and they spotted it because they're not going to turn up at all 3 festivals. The reality is to have a 7-week gap between Cheltenham and Aintree is great for the English horses, and to have the 7-week gap between Cheltenham and Punchestown is great for the Irish horses. And if the Irish horse is better off going left-handed, it'll come to Aintree, and if the English horse is better off going right-handed, it'll go to Punchestown or something similar. But I was surprised that the Irish trainers that I asked were like, yeah, I can see that. I mean, the only one thing they did all say is the ground has got to be right, which they don't have any concerns about that at Punchestown, because Punchestown water it so much. So I think it's got to be talked about.
You're now at the top of this trainers' table, as I've been saying. Paul Nicholls and Nicky Henderson are beneath you. Paul Nicholls desperately wants his trainer's title back. Do you think he ever will get it back?
I think it's likely. Like, he won't rest until he's got it and got another one. And he wants to beat Martin Pipe's record. I know he does.
So he's got one more to equal it, hasn't he?
Yeah, but he's got that fight. That you need something. In life, you need something to really fire you, the desire, and that will burn hard in him. And I know it burns hard in him. He's a fierce competitor. He hates losing. And at the moment things aren't going as well as he'd like it to, and that will just make him, like I said last year, don't poke the bear. And this is poking the bear for him. He will come back as strong as he can possibly come back. Things will change. He'll just turn it around because he can, and I'd never underestimate him.
You must reflect on what his strengths are and were on a pretty regular basis. How do you think he moved the dial? Because people talk about Pipe moving the dial, and then that era when Paul made people train in a different way.
When I was in it, I never really, it was the only thing I ever learned. It's not like I moved around different trainers learning different methods and got to Paul's and went, whoa, look at all the difference here. It was what was normal to me. It was when I was growing up show jumping with my dad. I didn't move around show jumpers and just, consider myself to be in the best place when I got back to Dad's. I've been very lucky. You look at me and Harry, hopefully we've got a bit of talent, but we've also been very lucky. We've been in the right places, and we've done well for the for the opportunities that we were presented with, and took them with us. But Paul, just like, I don't know, he's just relentless. It's never enough. It's just the desire, the hunger. It's just always been there, and people get wrapped. You've got to have the right temperament to work with Paul, I think, because if you haven't got that desire, if you haven't got that fight, if you haven't got that hunger in you, I could see it not getting you down, but I could see you looking at him going, okay, this isn't just a job to this man. This is a lot more than a job. And I think, I had that. Clifford had that. Ruby had that when we were there. I don't know. He like I say, when I go back to the start of our conversation, the director of proceedings, he set the tone for winning.
Okay, well, this director of proceedings is going to stay with us for the next hour or so. We'll be talking about yesterday's racing. We'll be talking about some of his key horses who might well be successful at those big spring festivals, whenever they happen to be run at the end of the season. And after this, we'll be hearing from one of his key rivals in the Trainers' Championship, Nicky Henderson.
Watch live racing now on racingtv.com.